a mustache and a supernova, tossed off the cliffs of Dover.
Hello friends, Jay-Z here with Flashpoint Radio. Thank you for joining me. It is Friday, July 19th, 2013, and on this edition of Flashpoint Radio, we'll look at what Barack Obama had to say today about Trayvon Martin. We'll look at some surprising statistics, and we'll look at what I think is actually happening to the black communities in this country. The weekend's coming up, and there are a lot of actions planned tomorrow at noon around the country. Justice for Trayvon rallies being put on in most major cities. Most of the rallies have been peaceful. Some have been a bit violent. The police reaction has been laughable at times. I was at the St. Louis rally yesterday, took a few pictures, and there seemed to be more police there than supporters of the rally. And the rally was on the steps of the old courthouse. They were simply speaking. There was no need for that kind of police presence. But there has been some violence, namely in Oakland and Sacramento. We'll see what happens tomorrow. I really hope those that really care about the plight of the black communities in this country and what has happened to them over the last, say, 50 years by namely the Democratic Party, will learn to out those agitators that have been infiltrating their ranks as of late. And you will see this from this article right here, Examiner.com, Trayvon Martin rally infiltrated by communist Occupy Wall Street activists. Yes, to shift from the plight of the black people to the plight of just the people in this country and the damage done by capitalism. And I've seen a lot of the signs of a lot of the protesters at these rallies. It is workers' unions, world workers' unions. These are communist organizations that are taking advantage of the plight of the black community, taking advantage of victims, and turning them from actually working for actual change and liberty, and turning them towards what I like to call revenge politics. It happened in the Occupy protests. I was down there. I talked to many of them. And the ones that were organizing it were communists. And they didn't want to put the bankers in jail. They didn't want true justice. They wanted to put the bankers on a platform and hang them or bring the guillotines out and execute them publicly. And I'm not joking. That was their actual words. They believe in revenge politics, and they use it to gain power so their leaders can be put into place, and then they can just crush everybody below. That includes the blacks, the whites, and the Mexicans. But let's look at what our president had to say today. From the National Journal, President Obama, Trayvon Martin could have been me 35 years ago. Yes, he goes on to talk about the plight of the black man in the department stores, always being followed around, always being looked at as a shoplifter, how when black people walk down the streets or walk through a parking lot, doors lock, the automatic door locks lock. When a black person gets on an elevator, a presumably white woman will clutch her purse and hold her breath until her floor and she can get off safely. This was a bad move by the president. I think this is just another drive by the executive branch to drive a wedge between blacks and whites in this country. So we can't get together and look at the government and say they're the problem. To combat these social issues, he said we need to train local governments to reduce mistrust in the legal system. How about ending the war on drugs that puts more black youth in jail for nonviolent drug offenses and turns them into violent offenders than any other reason in this country? Examine local laws such as Stand Your Ground and see if they're actually doing any good. We'll look at something in just a second and show that. And think about ways to bolster and support African American boys so they do not get caught up in the legal system. No mention of unwed mothers, no mention of fathers not being around in the black communities, no mention of any of those things that have happened in the last 50 years. Illegitimacy was not a problem in the black communities 75 years ago until the government came in, namely the Democrats, who were the party of the KKK. They realized that, well, the KKK wasn't going to be in power anymore, so they just shifted to point at the black communities, and they took advantage of them. And they're still doing it today. The Democrats, the party of the KKK, they came into the cities, and, well, we've seen what has happened. Let's look at this stat, though. from RasmussenReports.com, more Americans view blacks as racist than whites, Hispanics. This is from before the George Zimmerman verdict. Among black Americans, 31% think most blacks are racist, while only 24% consider most whites racist. That's a striking statistic that I'm sure you did not hear on MSNBC. And speaking of stand your ground, from Infowars.com via the Daily Caller, or vice versa, blacks benefit from Florida's stand your ground law at disproportionate rate. Yes, it turns out that quite a few more blacks are using the stand your ground defense in the state of Florida than whites are. And it is working to keep them out of jail for simply defending themselves using their Second Amendment rights. Remember, when you take Second Amendment rights away from one group of people, you take them away from everybody. The same goes with all rights. So when blacks say, I want to take these rights away from the whites, you really think they're going to let you have rights that we don't? No, they want to take the rights away from everybody. We have this also from PolitiFact.com. It's the Truthometer. A stat's been going around saying in the 513 days between Trayvon dying and today's verdict, 11,106 African Americans have been murdered by other African Americans. It came from a a Bureau of Justice Statistics report from 2007. And well, the ruling by PolitiFact, which is a liberal organization, used just to demonize conservative talking points, they say they're only fact-checking the math based on the available data and not the race problem going on between the verdict. And they say the number sounds extremely precise, but they rate this claim mostly false. So, the claim is true, but it is mostly false. Sounds exactly like doublespeak. Sounds like 1984 to me. And where they got those statistics from, bjs.gov. This is a study from 2007, Black Victims of Violent Crime. And it showed that from 1993 to 2001, the violent victimization rate for blacks declined, but it has become stable from 01 to 05. So we don't have any stats from after 05, but we do have this, and we looked at this last year on Flashpoint Radio, and this is percent of violent victimization by victim race. Black Americans are victimized violently by whites 11.5% of the time, 77% of the time by blacks. Whites, 15.1% by blacks, and 69.7% by whites. Yeah, I mean, the stats show that race crime is not a problem in this country. It happens, and in instances where it happens, it should be treated like a regular crime. I mean, I don't see how a white person killing a black person should get more time in jail than a white person killing a white person. Seems to me like killing a person is killing a person if we're talking equality here. But I decided to look back because, we have gone through a lot of actual racist times in this country, most notably after the Civil War. Oh, that's right, caused by Reconstruction in the South and the government forcing integration. And I decided to look up these statistics on lynching. The most violent racist way blacks have ever been killed in this country. And it turns out that 3,446 blacks were lynched from 1882 to 1968, the end of the Civil War, to the Civil Rights Act of 1968. So, that's how many violent lynchings took place. And I'm not saying that we should go back to those times where blacks were lynched in this country, but that was 80 years, almost 3,500 blacks were lynched, presumably by whites. Almost 1,300 whites were lynched during that same time. But the funny thing is now we've got 11,000 blacks killed by blacks. And how many other blacks put in jail by our government? It seems like once our government got involved in the black communities, things have gotten a lot worse. And you can just look at this article from the Washington Post and see. Gun suicide and homicide, statistics shaped by race. Homicide gun deaths, much higher for blacks. Suicide gun deaths, much higher for whites. Looks like the globalists are winning. They bring in the drug trafficking into the inner cities and create, a reason to get into violent crime. And homicides go up for blacks. They bring in antidepressants and push them on all Americans, but whites disproportionately take antidepressants in this country, and the suicide rate goes up. looks like they're winning. Looks like we're dying at a higher rate, which is their stated goal, depopulation. And on the same front of depopulation, we've got this from USA Today from 2011, black population fall in major cities. This article whitewashes it as African Americans, blacks, are moving out of the cities to the suburbs. That's why their black populations are going down. I had another hypothesis for why that population is going down, and this article from learninc.org only confirmed my thoughts. Alarming trend, declining number of black births. Turns out that the replacement rate for blacks is lower than that of whites, and it is the fertility rate, the amount of babies being born to black mothers, is lower than the replacement rate needed to maintain the population. So they are declining as a population. Whites are declining as well, but blacks are declining at a faster rate than whites. And what do they state as a large problem and a large reason for that? Because they say that before the 1960s, there was no problem. But in the 1960s, we had the government pushing contraception. And then in the 1970s, we had the legalization of abortions. And if you look at this website, I plead that you do, because abortion is a travesty. It is a crime against humanity, but it is especially a crime against the black communities in this country. Just look up the history of Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger. But if you go to this website, blackgenocide.org, put on by mostly blacks who understand what is going on in this country and understand the plight and the effort to murder unborn black babies in this country, you'll see the stats. They approximate that since 1973, 13 million African Americans have been aborted. 13 million. While 306,000 plus were the victims of violent crimes. 15 to 20% of childbearing women in this country are black, but they constitute over 40% of the abortions in this country. Contraception and ease of abortions. It only breeds illegitimacy, fathers who don't care about their children because someone else will take care of them or an abortion will take care of them, and then you get where we're at today. A declining population, a government who can easily take advantage of the black population, along with marketers, along with Nike and the NBA and anyone else who wants to make money off of them. And they're not actually worried about the right problems. They're worried about one crime that took place, or one event that took place in Florida that doesn't affect them. It just doesn't. It doesn't personally affect you in another state. It was a Florida issue. But we let the media take advantage of you and take advantage of me and everyone else for talking about it. And now you get to where we are now. A divide in this country. And angry blacks in the streets. And communists looking to take advantage of that anger. We really need to calm down. We need to point our eyes at Washington and recognize that they are the problem. We need a revolution in this country against our corrupt and illegitimate federal government. Has to come from us. Has to. Black and white. Jay-Z signing off for Flashpoint Radio saying God bless and keep your eyes to the sky.
Never trust a white man trapping the black.